It was supposed to be a peaceful morning at JFK International Airport, with the gentle hum of arriving passengers, clinking luggage wheels, and the usual chaos of travelers shuffling through security. Among the crowd walked a quiet, elderly Filipino man named Eduardo Ramirez, dressed in a crisp white button-up shirt, beige trousers, and holding a small worn-out suitcase with trembling hands. He had arrived early for his flight to San Francisco, hoping to visit his only daughter for the first time in years. Eduardo had always been a quiet man, respected in his small community in New Jersey where he worked for decades as a public school janitor, never asking for much, always giving. But the world he entered that day at the airport didn't see a kind grandfather or a gentle soul. To Officer Raymond Stokes, a security cop with a history of unchecked aggression and barely concealed racism, Eduardo was simply a nuisance. As Eduardo approached the security checkpoint, confused by the automated machines and unsure where to place his documents, Raymond's patience snapped. Witnesses later described how the officer's voice began to rise, his tone laced with disgust, calling Eduardo too slow and accusing him of deliberately holding up the line. Eduardo tried to explain in soft, accented English, but Raymond wasn't interested in explanations. The crowd started to gather, some pulling out their phones. One woman whispered, "This doesn't feel right." And then, without warning, the slap echoed across the terminal, Raymond's hand striking Eduardo across the face so hard that his glasses flew to the floor. The old man stumbled, more in shock than pain. Silence fell over the terminal, and the moment hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. What Officer Raymond didn't know, however, was that he had just assaulted not only a kind man, but someone whose life had quietly touched hundreds. Because standing only 20 feet away, watching the entire scene unfold with cold fury in his eyes, was retired Judge Martin Delgado, the same judge who had presided over landmark civil rights cases for over 2 decades and who happened to be Eduardo's former neighbor. Judge Delgado had known Eduardo as the man who shoveled snow for the block without ever being asked, who helped raise generations of kids in their community, including Martin's own son. Now he watched as the man who once mended broken toys for children was humiliated in front of hundreds. He pulled out his phone, hit record, and began walking toward the chaos, every step deliberate, every breath filled with a rising storm. The video went viral within hours. By the time Eduardo was taken to a side room and interrogated, still dazed, still confused, the internet had already exploded in outrage. News anchors described the assault as shameful, gut-wrenching, and a public disgrace. Hashtags like #Justice for Eduardo and #Slap Scene around the world trended globally. Meanwhile, Judge Delgado wasn't finished. He activated every contact he had: civil rights attorneys, national media, government watchdogs. Within 24 hours, a legal team was assembled and a federal inquiry launched. Raymond Stokes was suspended pending investigation, but the public wanted more. They wanted accountability. Interviews with other travelers began to surface. A black college student from Atlanta described being profiled by Raymond the month before. A single mother from Korea detailed how he berated her for her accent. A pattern emerged, and it was damning. But the story's heart remained Eduardo, who, despite the public support, struggled to sleep, the sting of humiliation stronger than any physical pain. When he finally appeared in a televised interview sitting beside Judge Delgado and his daughter Maria, the country leaned in. He didn't cry, he didn't shout. He simply said, "I never thought I'd be seen by the world for something like this. I just wanted to visit my family." And that broke the nation's heart. What followed was a historic class-action lawsuit, not just against Raymond, but against the entire airport security system that had enabled abuse to flourish unchecked. Public hearings were held. Eduardo was invited to speak before Congress, and there, standing beneath the grandeur of the Capitol dome, he said something that would be etched into American history books. No one should need a powerful witness to be treated with dignity. The applause that followed lasted minutes, and Roger's voiceover would rise, calm but mighty. In a world where silence enables cruelty, sometimes justice begins with one man's trembling hands and the power of strangers who choose to watch and act. As Eduardo walked off stage with his family, the terminal where it all began unveiled a new plaque bearing his name, a permanent reminder that even in the most ordinary of places, the extraordinary can unfold when courage is caught on camera. In the weeks that followed, Eduardo's quiet strength became the heartbeat of a national reckoning. What began as a single moment of abuse caught on a cell phone spiraled into a movement, one that could no longer be ignored or brushed aside. Eduardo, once an invisible figure in the background of America's great machine, was now the symbol of the everyday dignity so often dismissed. Civil rights organizations, Asian American advocacy groups, and millions of empathetic strangers rallied behind his name. Town halls overflowed with stories from others who had suffered similar indignities in silence, stories that had been buried under fear, shame, or exhaustion. With every testimony, Eduardo sat at the front row, quietly nodding, offering a small smile or a hand to hold. The same man who had once cleaned floors for a living was now cleaning the rot from an entire system. And yet Eduardo never once called for revenge. Instead, he spoke of rebuilding, of retraining, of compassion, but also of accountability. His calm became contagious. Former airport staff stepped forward, testifying to years of racial profiling and unchecked power within the security ranks. One whistleblower revealed a secret log used by certain officers to track difficult passengers, most of whom were minorities. Another confessed to being punished for speaking out against misconduct. The Department of Homeland Security was forced to act. Sweeping reforms were announced: mandatory body cams for airport security, independent civilian review boards, and a zero-tolerance policy for racial discrimination. Meanwhile, Officer Raymond Stokes, now a disgraced name nationwide, was formally charged, not just with assault, but with civil rights violations. His trial would become the most watched courtroom event since George Floyd's. Yet the most powerful moment came not from a lawyer, but from Eduardo himself, who testified quietly, "I forgive him, but I do not excuse him, because forgiveness does not erase truth, and truth must be spoken even when it trembles." Eduardo's life transformed not with fame, but with purpose. Universities invited him to speak. A best-selling biography titled "The Janitor Who Changed the Law" topped charts. Documentaries were produced, awards were named after him, and the airport, once the scene of humiliation, invited him to cut the ribbon on its newly renamed Terminal for Justice and Dignity. Travelers paused to take photos with him, not because he was a celebrity, but because he was real, because he had reminded the nation that quiet does not mean weak, and old does not mean irrelevant. In his final interview before returning home to his small apartment in New Jersey, Eduardo sat across from a young Filipino journalist and smiled gently. "I never wanted attention, I just wanted to be seen. And now, not just me, but all of us who were overlooked, finally are." The screen would slowly fade to black as Roger's voice echoes one final time. In a country torn between silence and noise, between violence and virtue, one old man reminded us that the most powerful change comes not from shouting, but from standing, even after being struck. And the world did not forget. The story of Eduardo Ramirez became mandatory in diversity training across airports nationwide. His name entered textbooks, and most importantly in airports from coast to coast, when a traveler slowed down, looked confused, or simply needed help. There were hands, kind ones, reaching out, not to push, not to slap, but to guide. Because once, someone recorded, and the world finally watched.